大家好，我係 Joanne。
Hi everyone, my name is Joanne.
好高興今日可以喺度同大家分享我嘅見證啊！
I'm very glad that I can share my testimony with all of you today.
係啦，咁咧我先分享下咧我信主嘅經歷啦。
So I would like to start with my experience in how I came to know the Lord.
咁我喺中學嘅時候接觸福音嘅。
I first heard the gospel back in my high school days.
咁咧我讀嗰間中學咧係一間基督教嘅學校。
And it was a Christian high school that I attended.
咁咧大部分老師咧都係基督徒嚟嘅。
Most teachers were Christians.
咁咧老師咧會同我哋唱詩啦、祈禱、睇聖經，仲有團契分享嘅。
So our teachers would sing hymns or pray or read the Bible or even have Christian fellowship with us.
係啦，咁咧我就喺咁樣嘅環境之下讀書，慢慢咧就認識神多啲啦。
And as I studied in such an environment, I gradually learned more about God.
咁咧，但係因為咧我嘅爸爸媽媽咧係拜偶像嘅。
But because my parents are idol worshippers,
咁所以咧佢哋好抗拒我去信神。
so they were very resistant to my believing God.
咁啊多次警告我唔好信神嘅。
So many times they warned me, you should not believe in God.
所以咧喺中一嘅時候咧我就唔敢去信神啦。
So because of that, back in year 7, I didn't have the courage to know more about God.
咁但係好感謝神咧，好巧妙咁安排我有返教會嘅機會喎。
But thanks be to God, He amazingly provided an opportunity for me to start going to church.
咁我可以決志信主咧，都要多謝我個妹妹。
And I have to thank my sister, for it's through her that I was able to got to a point where I finally made a decision to believe in the Lord.
咁我妹妹咧就細我3年嘅。
My sister is 3 years younger than me.
咁嗰陣時候咧，佢係一個小學生。
She was still a primary school student then.
咁唔知點解咧，佢就竟然接受咗老師嘅邀請咧，去參加教會嘅聚會喎。
And I don't know why, but somehow she accepted the invitation by one of her teachers to attend church service.
咁我唔記得咗媽咪當時嘅反應係點啦。
I can't remember how my mom reacted to that.
咁但係媽咪應該好抗拒基督教㗎嘛。
But you know, my mom was very opposed to Christianity.
咁但係因為邀請嘅人咧係我妹妹嘅老師，咁佢就唔敢推辭啦。
But because it was my sister's teacher who invited her, so my mother did not feel it was right to say no.
咁就係咁咧，我就身為家姐，就當時咧就帶妹妹返教會啦。
And because of this, as the older sister, I showed the responsibility of taking my younger sister to church.
咁就喺我帶妹妹第一次返教會嘅時候咧，就有一個姐姐同我傾偈。
And the first time I went to church, a sister came and talked to me.
咁嗰一刻咧，我就深深感受到父神對我嘅愛。
And I deeply felt the love of God at that moment.
咁終於我就決志信主啦。嗰時候咧，我讀中2，應該係中2嘅暑假。
So around the summer, after year 8, I decided to put my trust in the Lord.
咁但係決志信主之後咧，咁屋企人都阻撓啦，就唔俾我返教會啦。
But after I made this decision to believe in God, I was not allowed to go to church anymore because of the strong opposition from my family.
咁但係咧，透過學校嘅團契咧，我就可以繼續認識神。
But through the Christian fellowship at school, I was able to continue to know more about God.
因為學校時間裏面咧，媽咪唔知我返團契。
Because my mom wouldn't know what I do at school.
咁直到中5。
So until I got to year 11.
咁我就會考成績唔係幾好，就要轉校讀預科啦。
Because my results weren't that great, so I had to transfer to another school to continue my studies in the 6th form.
咁由於我本來咧係讀一間傳統嘅女校。
Originally, I was attending a traditional girls' school.
咁爸爸媽媽都管得我好嚴嘅。
And my parents were very strict with me.
咁所以我完全唔知外面嘅世界係點嘅。
So I had no idea what the outside world was like.
咁我當時又唔知點好啦，咁所以我就不斷嘅禱告求神幫我揾一間中學。
And because I didn't know what I should do, so I just kept praying and kept asking God for help to help me find a suitable high school.
咁最後咧，我就入讀咗一間屋企附近成績冇咁好嘅中學。
Finally, I enrolled in a secondary school near my home that was not very good.
應該係話即係比較我之前嗰個學校嘅成績冇咁好啦。
All right, it's only like relatively speaking, so compared to my previous school.
因為在座都有一啲
姊妹
喺讀嗰間中學。
Okay, I have to clarify, yeah, it's not a bad school because there are quite a few of us here who study in that school. So it's just relatively speaking, compared to my previous school, it wasn't as great.
咁啊開始嘅時候咧，我就好驚，我驚裡面啲學生係好曳嘅。
So at the very start, I was actually very anxious. Yeah, like I was very anxious because I wasn't sure if the students would be very bad in that school.
係啦，咁我又驚自己冇朋友
I'm very
啦，
naughty
係啦，又驚冇朋友，又驚俾人蝦啦。
And yeah, I was kind of worried that I might not be able to make friends or I'll be bullied.
係啦，咁但係神真係好愛我，佢賜俾我咧係超乎我想象嘅。
But God really loves me. He granted me more than I could ever imagine.
係啦，咁咧為我安排咗一班好好嘅同學同老師。
He arranged for me to hang around with a group of really nice classmates and had really good teachers.
嗱，咁我就喺呢個愉快嘅環境之下咧，就讀咗中六、中七2年啦。
So I completed year 11 and 12. Is that right? No, year 12 and 13.
13.
Yeah, so I completed year 12 and 13 in a very pleasant environment that God provided for me.
咁我真係好感恩咧，神為我預備得好好。我喺依間中學裏面讀書嗰2年咧，係我求學時期裏面最開心嘅2年嚟嘅。
So yeah, I really thank God for such a great provision because looking back, I would say those 2 years were the happiest time in my entire schooling.
係啦，更加要感謝神嘅咧，就係我喺依間中學度咧識咗一個同學。
And I have to thank God even more for letting me meet a particular classmate through this school.
係啦，就係佢帶我返教會，咁我就開始咗教會生活啦。
And it was through this classmate, she invited me to church, and that's how I started my church life.
咁我喺教會就可以繼續學習神嘅話語啦。
And I could continue to learn God's word at church.
係啦，咁但係由於我屋企人都係對我返教會有好多阻撓嘅。
But since my family was still very against me going to church,
咁所以初時咧我都係講大話，話我去圖書館温書。
so at first I was actually lying to them. I would tell them that I was just studying in the library.
咁慢慢咧，其實我就係講我去圖書館温書温全日，但係其中有2個鐘我係返咗教會，佢唔知嘅。
And then slowly I would tell them, I actually went to, so you did go to the library?
Yeah, yes.
Okay, so later I kind of changed my tactic. So I would go to the library for the entire day, but during those hours, actually, I took 2 hours to go to church without my parents knowing.
咁好似冇咁大話。
So I felt in my heart it's not as big a lie.
咁但係後來返教會耐咗咧，都係唔想講大話嘅。
But after going to church for some time, I knew I shouldn't be lying.
咁所以我就同爸爸媽媽講真話，話我要返教會啦。
So I confessed to my parents, and I just made it clear that I do want to go to church.
咁當然爸爸媽媽就反對啦。
And obviously they would oppose to that idea.
咁我屋企好傳統嘅，就一定要跟佢哋拜偶像嘅。
My family is a very traditional Chinese family, and they wanted me to follow them in worshipping idols.
咁我由細到大都係好乖嘅。
And I had always been this really well-behaved child.
咁我絕對聽爸爸媽媽嘅説話嘅。
And I obeyed my family in absolutely everything.
係啦，亦都好尊敬佢哋，唔會逆佢哋嘅意思啦。
And I respected them, and I never went against their will.
咁就為咗返教會就同爸爸媽媽嗌交啦。
But in order to go to church, I ended up quarreling with them.
咁呢樣其實令我好大嘅掙扎嘅。
And this made me struggle a lot.
咁曾經為呢件事好多次嘅祈禱啦，求神去開路。
And for this, I kept praying, kept praying and praying, asking God to open up a way for me.
感謝神咧，讓我經歷到佢喎。
And I thank God for letting me experience Him.
係啦，聖經裏面咧，以弗所書6章1至2節咧，就講到
In Ephesians chapter 6, verses 1 to 2.
你們作兒女的，要在主裏聽從父母，這是理所當然的。要孝敬父母，使你得福，在世長壽，這是第一條帶應許的誡命。
Ephesians 6, verses 1 to 2. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother. This is the first commandment with a promise.
咁所以咧，我就記住聖經嘅教導，學習忍耐。
So, bearing this in mind, I learned perseverance.
唔同佢哋嗌交，好好讀書，好好做家務。
So I no longer quarreled with them. I studied hard. I also did all my housework.
除咗違背聖經嘅教導，例如佢唔俾我返教會啦，或者係要我食拜祭食物嗰啲之外咧。
Except for matters that were clearly against the Bible's teaching, such as, for me not to go to church or making me have food that was for idol worship.
其他嘅事咧，我都做好俾佢哋睇。
Everything else, I would do my very best.
我想證明俾佢哋睇。
To prove to them,
我返教會咧，唔係令佢哋冇咗個女。
My going to church didn't mean that they lost a daughter.
而係有一個更好、更加識得愛佢哋嘅女。
But rather, they are going to have an even better daughter. And because yeah, she would know how to love them even more.
當然呢份愛係從神嚟嘅愛啦。
But of course, this love comes from God.
咁後來爸爸媽媽都睇到我嘅堅持同埋改變，
And as time goes by, my parents saw my persistence and my change.
咁慢慢就接受咗我，俾我返教會啦。
And slowly they accepted the fact that I was going to church.
後來咧仲試過出席教會嘅活動，
And later on, they even attended some of the church activities.
係啦，呢個咧都讓我睇到神真係好真實。
And this really helped me to see how real our God is.
咁透過導師不斷嘅鼓勵啦，
And through the constant encouragement of our church leaders,
係啦，讓我明白到咧自己有好多不足嘅地方，
I realized that I had many shortcomings.
但係只要咧我願意認罪悔改，
But as long as I'm willing to confess my sin and to repent,
委身俾神，進一步去倚靠神，
and to commit my life to God, to take that extra step to rely on Him more,
咁咧神會慢慢改變我，塑造我成為一個蒙神喜悅嘅人。
God will transform me even more and to mold me into someone who is pleasing to Him.
咁所以咧，我喺2002年嘅6月29號就受洗啦。
So I got baptized on the 29th of June in 2002.
而家數落嚟就有21年啦，原來。
So as I count, wow, it's been 21 years.
咁由於我自細咧都係好乖、好循規蹈矩啦，
And since I was always this well-behaved girl and I followed all the rules,
咁而且我又頭腦好簡單嘅，
and I was also quite a simple-minded
所
child.
以我覺得我信神嘅過程咧並唔係好特別。
So I felt that my conversion story was nothing extraordinary.
唔係經歷啲咩大衝擊啊，或者啲咩大嘅生命改變嗰一種。
It's not the kind of experience that you hear somebody, like having this sudden dramatic event happen, or how they experience like a life-changing event.
而係好自然、好簡單咁樣就相信神、跟從神啦。
But it's more very natural and simple how I just decided to follow God.
咁但係受洗只係一個開始，
But actually, baptism only marks the beginning of the Christian life.
係啦，點樣活出基督徒嘅生命？
How you then live the Christian life,
喺生活裏面咧去經歷神咧，先係真正嘅挑戰喎。
and to experience God in your daily life, that's the real challenge.
好啦，咁啊想同大家講下我嘅工作喎。
So I want to share with you about my job.
唔知大家估唔估到我之前嘅工作係咩呢？
I wonder if you could guess what my job was.
近來咧新識咗嘅朋友咧，一估就估到我係做咩噶啦。
So now I've come to know some new friends, and yeah, their first guess was correct.
可能係有樣睇嘅，
Maybe you can really tell from my appearance.
我係教書嘅。
I was a teacher.
係啦，咁我大學畢業之後咧就做小學老師，
So I became a primary school teacher upon my graduation,
咁一做咧就做咗18年啦。
and it had been 18 years.
係啦，咁我喺同一間學校咧做咗16年添。
I worked in the same school for 16 years.
係啦，咁回想我入呢間學校工作咧，其實都係好經歷神嘅預備嘅。
And looking back, how I came to start working in this particular school was really, again, God's provision.
咁頭先講我喺預科嘅時候開始返教會啦，
So I just shared that I started going to church back when I was doing my A levels.
咁我屋企咧原本係住得好近教會嘅，
And originally, I lived very close to church.
但係咧畢業之後咧冇耐咧，我屋企人咧就搬到去一個離教會遠啲嘅地方。
But shortly after I graduated from university, my family moved somewhere further away from church.
咁嗰陣時我仲係同緊屋企人一齊住嘅，
And at that time, I was still living with my family.
咁所以就好影響我返教會同埋服侍啦。
So it greatly affected my church life and my service as well.
於是咧我就決定轉工。
So I decided to change my job.
咁頭先我講話我好聽爸爸媽媽話啊嘛，
Just now I already shared that I'm someone who's very obedient to my parents.
咁所以根本係冇可能搬出嚟自己住嘅。
So it's actually almost impossible that I could move out from home.
咁所以我好大膽咁求神俾我一份工作，而嗰份工作咧係喺教會附近嘅。
So I boldly make the request to God, please grant me a job that is, where the school is very close to our church,
咁我就有個理由離開屋企人自己住啦。
so that I may have a good reason to move out and live there on my own.
咁我就可以搬到去喺教會同學校近嘅地方住，就唔會俾屋企人影響我返教會啦。
So I can live somewhere close to my school and to the church, and I won't be hindered by my family in how much I go to church or how much I serve.
咁當時咧香港嘅出生率下降，
And at that time, the birth rates in Hong Kong was dropping,
好多學校咧因為少咗學生咧而要減少老師。
And many schools had to cut down on their staff because of the reducing numbers of students.
咁所以咧有好多新老師都係揾唔到工作嘅。
So many new teachers actually couldn't find a job.
咁所以喺呢個惡劣嘅情況之下，我就寄求職信啦。
And it's under such circumstance that I had to send out my job application.
咁我淨係寄咗10幾封啫。
I only sent out just over 10 applications.
因為我淨係揀離教會近同埋基督教嘅學校嚟寄。
Because I only selected the schools that were close to church and were Christian schools.
咁仲記得我喺依間學校見工嘅時候係點嘅？
I still recall the day when I had my interview at this school.
因為嗰陣時候咧，我畢業冇耐，年之前啦，所以咧第一次面試咧，佢哋係唔請我嘅。
Because at that time I was a fresh grad, quite newly graduated, and I didn't have much experience, so I wasn't successful at my first interview.
咁隔咗幾個星期之後咧，校長突然之間打電話俾我喎。
But after a few weeks, I received a phone call from the school principal.
咁今次佢就話要請我啦。
And this time he said, he or she, sorry. Yeah, this time the principal said they're going to offer me this job.
係啦，咁我好好奇啦，明明之前個位已經幾個禮拜前請咗人，點解而家又再請我呢？
I was very curious because I thought the job was already taken a few weeks ago, but how come all of a sudden they decided to employ me instead?
咁後來我先知道咧，原來學校原本係要請一個中文老師，一個英文老師。
And it's only later on that I find out, originally the school wanted to look for one Chinese teacher and one English teacher.
咁原本個中文老師嘅職位已經請咗人㗎啦。
And someone had already filled the role of the Chinese teacher.
咁而英文老師嘅職位咧，就好長時間都請唔到啱嘅人選。
But it had been a long time and they still couldn't find someone suitable to take up the English teaching position.
而咁啱咧，學校裡面竟然有一個老師咧，係同時有中文同英文嘅教學資格嘅。
But amazingly, there was this one teacher at that school who had both the qualification for Chinese teaching and English teaching.
咁校長咧喺面試之後咧，就一直記住我。
And the principal actually had always remembered me since my interview.
咁咧佢就諗到一個方法。
So he came up with this idea.
佢就將嗰個原本教中文嘅老師轉去教英文。
So he actually moved that Chinese teacher who had both the qualifications to go and teach English.
咁然後我就代佢教中文。
So that I may become the Chinese teacher
咁
instead.
呢個係一個好神奇嘅事嚟嘅。
This is quite a miraculous or amazing thing, isn't
因
it?
為一般嘅老師只會讀一個專科嘅語文科。
Because most teachers would only specialize in one language.
咁而呢個老師竟然有中英文專業資格係好難得嘅。
But this teacher happened to have both Chinese and English teaching qualification. That's very rare.
咁而咁樣轉教科目嘅事咧，喺我之後16年裡面都冇聽過啦。
And ever since my days, I had never heard anyone experience something like that, where they would switch their specialization in their teaching in those 16 years that I was teaching at that school.
咁所以喺人睇嚟咧係冇可能嘅事。
So even though in the eyes of man this was something impossible,
咁但係我真係獲得教職，咁我如願可以搬翻喺教會附近度住啦。
but I really got the job, and so God granted me my wish. I could move somewhere very close to church.
咁呢個係神蹟嚟嘅。
Yeah, to me it was a miracle.
咁我就喺間學校咧工作咗16年，直到我離開香港。
So I stayed there and taught there for 16 years until I left Hong Kong.
係啦，咁老師嘅工作係好忙碌嘅。
Being a teacher was a very busy life.
咁教育學生都唔容易。
And it's not easy to teach children.
每一年咧都遇到難教嘅學生，甚至係難應付嘅家長。
Every year you will encounter some students that were particularly difficult, and not just students but the parents.
但
Very
係好
difficult.
感謝神咧，俾我呢份職業。
But I really thank God for giving me this occupation.
係啦，係我好中意嘅工作啦，亦都可以係服侍神嘅工作。
Yeah, I really liked my job, and it's also an opportunity for me to serve God.
因為我每日都可以接觸到啲學生，
Because every day I could come in touch with students.
咁我有機會可以同佢哋講聖經啦、祈禱、唱詩。
I would have the opportunity to share with them Bible stories, to pray with them, or even sing hymns with them.
咁讓我咧讓呢啲學生咧喺細個嘅時候咧就可以認識神。
So that these children, at their very young age, they had a chance to come to know God.
咁呢個將呢個福音嘅種子咧放喺佢哋心裏面。
And to sow the seed of the good news in their hearts.
咁而我工作咗好多年之後咧，我回想睇都係覺得神係好愛錫我嘅。
And after all these years have gone by, as I looked back, I really felt God truly loved me a lot.
唔單止安排呢個工作俾我啦，
Not only did He provided me with this job,
亦都因為我喺依間學校工作嘅緣故咧，我兩個女可以直接入依間學校讀書。
also because I was teaching there, my 2 daughters were able to enroll in this school directly.
咁我簡直覺得咧，當年嘅入職咧，其實係為咗我個兩個女準備嘅。
Now, as I look back, I really felt the reason I started teaching in this school was to prepare for my daughters who were to be born, so they could go into this school.
咁雖然唔係一間名校，但係神特意安排俾我兩個女讀嘅。
It wasn't a prestigious school, but I could see is God's provision for my 2 daughters.
咁啊，跟住想同大家講下兩個女啦。
So now I want to share with you about my 2 daughters.
係啦，咁咧喺好多朋友眼中咧，我哋人生都係好美滿幸福嘅。
So in the eyes of my friends, my life was great. It was blissful.
有好好嘅屋企人啦，爸爸媽媽啦，
I had very good family members, my really, parents who loved me,
有穩定嘅收入，
very stable income,
有自己中意嘅工作，
a job that I was passionate about,
有好好嘅老公，
I have a very good husband,
仲有兩個女。
and 2 daughters.
咁啊，如果人生一切都係咁順利咧，可能經歷唔到神。
So if everything is smooth in life, I might not experience God as much.
係啦，人生咧應該有一啲風浪咧，先至學識得點樣去依靠神。
Oftentimes, it's really through the storms in our lives that we experience God, how we should rely on Him.
咁我生命嘅轉捩點咧，應該係由兩個女出世開始啦。
And the turning point in my life was really when my 2 daughters were born.
咁 Eunice 咧由出世開始咧，就係一個好敏感又好中意喊嘅 BB。
Right from when Eunice was born, she had been a highly sensitive child who cried all the time.
晚上成日都喊嘅，佢出世頭3年幾乎係未試過一覺瞓天光。
She often cried in the middle of the night, and for her first 3 years, there was hardly any night she could sleep through.
咁1歲幾開始咧，就發覺佢嘅情緒成日失控啦。
And from when she was about 1 year old, we noticed that she often lost control of her emotions.
因為一啲小事就大喊，
And she would cry really badly over very trivial matters.
例如幫佢着咗一件唔啱佢心意嘅衫啦，
For example, we put something on her that she didn't like,
或者係攞錯一件唔係佢成日用嗰個餐具。
or maybe we gave her cutlery, or tableware that she wasn't used to using.
咁佢就會碌地大喊大半個鐘。
Then she would just roll on the floor and cry for half an hour.
咁佢對聲音同埋觸覺都好敏感嘅，
And she's particularly sensitive to touch and sound,
係咪唔俾人哋掂佢嘅？
and she wouldn't let other people touch her.
沖涼換衫出街呢啲咧，每一次都好似打仗咁樣。
So every time to get her changed or to give her a bath, it was like a battle for us.
咁如果你認為咧每個細路仔都係咁麻煩㗎啦，
You might think, well, every child's like that, right? It's very troublesome, chaotic.
咁你可以想象下佢比一般嘅小朋友嚴重幾倍。
But you can try imagining it's at least a few times worse than the average child.
咁到4歲幾嘅時候咧，連幼稚園嘅老師都發覺佢有啲問題啦。
And when she got to around 4 years of age, even the school teachers started noticing something might be wrong with her.
佢喺學校好少同人哋交流嘅。
She hardly interacted with others in school.
咁於是我哋就帶佢去評估啦。
So we decided to take her to get assessed.
咁結果咧就確診佢係有感統障礙同埋自閉症。
And in the end, she was diagnosed with sensory processing disorder and autism.
當然自閉症有好多種，佢係輕微啲嘅。
Of course, there are many different spectrum, like under autism, so she's less severe in autism.
咁對於一個專業嘅老師嚟講，
To a professional teacher,
咁我曾經好理想化咁樣去幻想我個女咧一定係好乖啦、斯文啦、大方得體嘅。
I had always had this ideal picture in my mind that my daughter would grow up to be this really polite, very well-mannered, very nice girl.
咁加上我係老師咧，我一定係一個好識教嘅媽媽。
And because I'm a teacher myself, I would be a very good, qualified mother who knows how to train up my daughter.
但係現實唔係咁樣，
But the reality is not like this.
佢經常都係大喊碌地啦，甚至喺學校咬人。
So she would always cry, roll on the floor, or even bite others at school.
咁照顧佢嘅日子裏面咧，係不停衝擊我嘅底線嘅。
So as I was taking care of her, it kept pushing my boundaries and yeah.
咁我就發覺啊，其實我無論我幾專業都係冇用嘅。
And I realized no matter how professional I am is not helping.
咁啊，完全唔係我控制到啦。
It's totally beyond my control.
咁喺照顧佢嘅過程裏面咧，其實有好多沮喪、流淚同埋無能為力。
So in the process of taking care of her, I experienced a lot of frustration, helplessness, and just yeah, or even just feel really depressed sometimes.
咁我哋只能夠禱告交託俾神。
So we could only pray and commit everything to God.
咁喺佢升小學之前咧，原本我好拒絕咧，好抗拒，唔想佢入我間小學讀書嘅。
So actually, prior to her moving up to primary school, I actually really didn't want her to come to my school.
我係完全唔想俾同事見到我個女係咁樣嘅。
I didn't want my colleagues to see my girl like that.
咁係啦，原來我一直俾人哋好和善謙虛，咁原來我都有自負自私嘅一面嘅喎。
So even though, I always give others this impression that I'm such a humble and gentle teacher, but actually inside I also have some deep-rooted pride and selfishness.
我唔想俾人哋見到我自己弱嘅一面啦。
I don't want to show others the weaker side.
咁但係經過好長時間嘅思考等候之後咧，我都係決定放低自己嘅諗法。
But after a long time of prayer and further consideration, I decided to let go of my own will.
咁俾佢入讀我間學校啦，因為我間學校係基督教學校嚟嘅。
So I decided to enroll her to my school because it's a Christian school.
同埋呢間學校咧都係重視品格教育啦，學校嘅文化都係好關愛嘅。
Because this school focuses a lot on training up their character and nurturing, loving personality and so on.
咁所以我覺得佢需要喺咁有愛嘅環境之下成長。
And I felt that she needed an environment like that, full of love to keep growing.
咁於是我就放低自己嘅諗法，以佢嘅成長為先。
So I was willing to finally let go of my own ideas and to put her benefit first.
咁好感恩啦，佢的確咧好愉快咁樣度過咗5年半嘅小學生活。
And very thankfully, she actually enjoyed her 5.5 years of schooling.
有好多好錫佢嘅老師，亦都教佢好正面咁樣去諗嘢。
There were many teachers who really loved her, and they taught her how to think positively.
除咗要學習放低自己對專業嘅自我認同之外
Besides having to let go of my professional self-identity,
喺照顧佢嘅過程裏面咧，我都睇到我真正嘅自己。
in the process of caring for Eunice, I also, got to see my true self.
以前咧喺學校咧，我一直都係俾人叫做係好溫柔同埋好有耐性嘅老師嚟嘅。
So in the past, people always saw me as very gentle and very patient.
我自己都覺得我嘅性格係咁嘅。
And I also felt, I was like that.
但係喺照顧佢嘅時候，我就發覺完全唔係啦。
But only when I started caring for her, I realized I was totally not that.
我有1000萬次脾氣暴躁，如果想打，即係可以打嘅話，我應該會成日想打佢嘅。
Yeah, there are just countless times where I lost my temper completely, and if I could smack her, I would have.
咁我真正睇到咧，原來我並唔係想像中咁溫柔同有耐性嘅。
So I found, I came to see that I wasn't as gentle and patient as I imagined myself to be.
係啦，感謝神俾我睇到自己嘅不足啦。
So I thank God for showing me my shortcomings.
咁亦都正因為佢咧，我去學習忍耐、溫柔同埋學習愛佢。
And it's exactly because of her that I learned patience, love, and
咁亦都係啦，呢一個真係一個好難嘅功課嚟嘅。
And it's a really difficult lesson to learn.
係啦，到而家我都仲係覺得好難，但係我相信係神要我認清自己，去依靠佢去學習。
So even up to this point, I still found it difficult, but I believe it's God's will for me to understand my true condition and to learn to rely on Him.
咁因為我以前喺學校咧都教過呢一啲嘅學生。
In the years I was teaching, I had come across students like this.
咁所以我知道咧，如果唔理佢嘅話咧，到升上小學或者長大之後咧，會有好多問題嘅。
I knew that if you don't give them extra care, by the time they moved on to primary school or when they grow up, they would have even greater problems in life.
咁所以我哋一直都帶佢做好多唔同嘅訓練。
So we actually took her to go for various training.
咁喺照顧佢嘅時候咧係好困難，但係神安排咗好多小天使喺我哋身邊。
So even though in that whole process of caring for her, it was very difficult. God actually provided many angels around us.
咁有幼稚園嘅老師對佢特別嘅照顧啦。
There were kindergarten teachers who were particularly nice in caring for her.
仲有咁啱佢讀 K3 嗰年咧，學校參加咗政府嘅試驗計劃。
And by the year she was in the third year of kindergarten in Hong Kong, the school actually participated in a government program.
係啦，咁喺學校咧竟然有全年嘅專業訓練班俾佢。
And in the school, the kindergarten she attended, there was like a year-long professional training.
咁當時係好少有嘅。
And it was very rare at that time.
而且係免費添。
And it was free.
係啦，咁因為呢啲嘅訓練咧，其實係好貴嘅，成千蚊一堂嘅。
And such training was very costly. It cost about 1,000 Hong Kong dollars per one session.
咁跟住佢上到小學之後咧，又有社工嘅跟進啦。
And then as she moved on to primary school, she had social worker who followed up on her.
咁呢個社工咧係教會嘅姊妹。
And this social worker was actually a sister from church.
咁所以可以想象咧係有幾咁特別嘅照顧。
So you can imagine how well taken care of she was.
咁亦都有好多愛錫佢嘅老師。
And there were many teachers who loved her.
嗰啲都係我嘅朋友嚟嘅。
And they were all my friends.
咁好感恩咧 ，Eunice 就咁升上小學之後咧，就越嚟越進步啦。
So very thankfully, as she moved on to primary school, she really made great progress.
咁我諗大家而家睇咧都睇唔出有啲咩太大嘅問題。
So I believe now, as you observe, like you couldn't really tell there's much problem with her.
咁原本就諗最難捱嘅時間已經過去啦。
So originally I thought, oh, the worst is finally over.
但係我有兩個女啊。
But don't forget, I've got 2 daughters.
咁就輪到細女 Janice 上小學咯喎。
So it came to the time when Janice had to go to primary school.
咁 Janice 嘅性格咧同 Eunice 係完全唔同嘅。
Janice's character was completely different from Eunice's.
由佢出世開始咧，已經係非常好湊嘅 BB。
And ever since she was born, she was a really good baby, very easy to take care of.
肯食肯瞓，開心小脾氣。
She eats well, she sleeps well, and she doesn't have much temper. And very happy baby.
咁嗰陣時我就暗自歡喜，佢一定冇家姐嘅問題啦。
So at that time, I was thinking to myself, she wouldn't have any problem like her sister.
咁直到佢升上小學之後咧，我哋發覺佢係認唔到字嘅。
But only until she started primary school, we noticed she actually could not recognize words.
係啦，無論係好簡單嘅中文字啦，定係 ABC。
Whether it's very simple Chinese characters or English alphabets.
係啦，重複又重複溫習咧，佢都係記唔到嘅。
Even if we reviewed them over and over again with her, she wouldn't be able to remember.
當然以我嘅經驗就知道出問題啦。
Of course, from my experience, I could quickly discern there's some problem.
咁於是咧就帶佢去評估，確診咗咧係讀寫障礙。
So we took her for assessment, and she was diagnosed with dyslexia.
咁作為一個專業嘅中文老師，
So as a professional Chinese teacher,
有一個唔識字嘅女。
You have a daughter who can't recognize words.
係啦，咁呢個確實係再一次重重打擊我嘅。
It again was a big blow to me.
咁我係好心痛嘅。
I felt heartbroken.
因為我教過好多讀寫障礙嘅學生。
Because I had taught countless students who had dyslexia.
佢哋比其他嘅學生多10幾倍嘅努力。
They worked harder than other students.
但係佢哋只係換嚟唔合格嘅成績。
But even if they worked so hard, they still could not pass their tests or exams.
加上香港教育制度係精英主義啊。
And especially in Hong Kong, where it's a very competitive environment.
不停嘅默書考試咁樣長年累月嘅挫敗咧，其實令到佢哋好自卑嘅。
So with the endless dictations, tests, and they keep failing, it really make them lose all their self-esteem.
但係好感恩咧 ，Janice 嘅性格咧係比較樂天同埋善忘嘅。
But thankfully, Janice, her character is quite happy and very forgetful.
係啦，佢成績唔好咧，都係唔開心一陣嘅啫，唔記得㗎啦，跟住。
Yeah, she's very optimistic, and so even if she got a very bad mark, low mark, she would only be sad for a short while, and then she would forget about it.
咁亦都感恩有過大女兒嘅經驗啦。
But I was also thankful that from my older daughter's experience,
咁今次我同 Enoch 嘅接受程度就大啲啦。
Enoch and I could accept this easier than the first time with my older daughter.
咁我好快就同老師商量點樣幫佢學習啦。
So very quickly, I had some discussion with her teachers to see how we could assist her in her learning.
安排功課啊、考試嘅調適。
And to adjust her homework and her examination.
咁而我學校咧喺呢方面都係支援得好好嘅。
And my school did very great in supporting her.
咁加上我係校內嘅老師，可以同社工老師溝通咧都係好方便。
The advantage as well is because I was teaching at the school, so I could easily communicate with the social workers and the teachers.
咁喺各樣嘅安排之下咧，總算讓 Janice 咧可以順利喺香港度過咗2年半嘅小學生活。
So under all these special arrangements, Janice also completed her first 2 years of primary school in Hong Kong.
咁都唔係有好大嘅挫敗感或者自卑感嘅。
And she hadn't come across too great a sense of failure or this low self-esteem or feeling of inferiority.
係啦，咁同大家分享下一節嘅經文啦。
So I would like to share a verse with you.
喺路加福音12章6至7節。
In the Gospel of Luke, chapter 12, verses 6 to 7.
5個麻雀不是賣2分銀子麼？但在神面前1個也不忘記。就是你們的頭髮也被數過了，不要懼怕，你們比許多麻雀還貴重。
Are not 5 sparrows sold for 2 pennies, and not one of them is forgotten before God? Why even the hairs of your head are all numbered? Fear not, you are of more value than many sparrows.
神連我哋嘅頭髮都數過。
So even our hairs on our head, God had numbered.
所以我覺得神睇我同埋2個女咧都係好寶貴嘅。
So surely my 2 daughters are precious in God's eyes.
頭先我講到我點樣入呢間學校工作啦。
So just now I already shared how I started teaching in this particular school.
回想起嚟咧，我認為係神為2個女兒預備嘅。
And as I look back, I believe it's really God's provision for my 2 daughters.
因為我嘅學校咧喺區裏面咧，其實係比較難入嘅學校。
Because my school was one of those schools that was hard to get in within the district we were in.
就算唔入依間，我幫佢哋揾另一間學校。
Even if they didn't end up going to that school, I would have to look for another school for them.
我唔知道，即係我唔喺嗰間學校工作嘅話咧，我唔會知道學校裡面係點樣對待啲特殊學習需要嘅學生。
And if I weren't teaching in that school that they were enrolled in, I wouldn't have any idea how that school was treating students with special educational needs.
係啦，我亦都唔會知道咧嗰啲老師同同學咧會點樣對佢哋。
And I wouldn't know how they were treated by the teachers and their classmates.
咁更加唔使講咧，有好多我相熟嘅同事對佢哋有特別嘅愛錫啦。
And not to mention the fact that I was teaching this school, meant there were many colleagues and friends who could take special care of my children.
佢哋成日都無端端會收到老師嘅禮物。
And they often get these surprise gifts from their teachers.
又會特登揀佢哋參加唔同嘅活動。
And they would get picked to join various activities.
係，所以我覺得神咧真係好知道我哋嘅需要。
Yeah, so God truly knows our needs.
就算當時咧我仲未結婚，仲未有孩子。
Even back before I was married and had children.
但係我覺得神咧已經為我哋準備好一切需用嘅嘢。
But I could see God already had everything in store for my future.
更加特別嘅咧係就係我係一個老師啦。
Even more special, being a teacher.
咁我以往照顧特殊學習需要嘅學生嘅經驗咧，幫助我接納同埋教導到2個女兒。
My experience in taking care of SEND students with special educational needs actually helped me in caring for my own daughters.
而我親身照顧2個女嘅經驗咧，又讓我更加了解呢啲學生同埋家長。
And my experience in caring for my daughters in turn became an advantage because I could better identify with parents who had the same challenges.
咁我可以更加身同感受咁去明白佢哋嘅困難。
So I could really put myself in their shoes to really identify with them, to understand their difficulties.
而且咧去懂得安慰同埋教導佢哋。
And I know how I could comfort them and to teach them.
我試過咧同呢啲學生同埋家長咧一齊祈禱，亦都用聖經嘅話咧去鼓勵佢哋。
And I had actually prayed with these parents and to use God's word to encourage them.
所以我話咧，我嘅工作其實都係服侍神嘅工作。
that's why I said I was able to serve God through my job.
咁或者呢個咧都係神安排我有呢兩個女兒嘅心意。
And maybe this was also God's will in giving me these my two daughters.
俾大家睇下相片。
So show you some pictures.
咁係啦，咁 Eunice 咧啱啱過咗12歲生日。
So Eunice just passed her 12th birthday.
咁睇住佢嘅成長咧，我同 Enoch 真係付出咗好多。
As we see her growing up, obviously Enoch and I really gave our best efforts.
係啊，再睇下一張相啦。係咪好可愛咧 ，Eunice？
Isn't Eunice cute?
咁係啦，我哋都真係睇住佢嘅成長咧，不得不感謝神。
And as we witness her growing up, we really had to give thanks to God.
我記得咧呢張相咧係佢1年班嘅時候咧喺學校寫嘅，感謝耶穌賜俾我愛我嘅爸爸媽媽。
So the picture on the left was this drawing that she did in primary 1, and on it she wrote, "Thank God, thank Jesus, thank the Lord Jesus for granting me my father and my mother who love me."
係啦，喺詩篇127篇1節。
In Psalm 127 verse 1 it says,
講到若不是亞偉建造房屋，建造的人就枉然勞力；若不是亞偉看守城池，看守的人就枉然警醒。
"Unless Yahweh builds the house, those who build it labor in vain. Unless the Lord watches over the city, the watchman stays awake in vain."
我哋做嘅一切咧，如果唔係按住神嘅心意，
Whatever we do, if it's not according to God's will,
如果冇將子女帶到去神面前，其實一切都係徒然嘅。
if we can't bring our children to come before God, everything is in vain.
喺養育仔女嘅過程裏面咧，有好多難題。
Yeah, we encounter all kinds of difficulties in the process of bringing up our children,
但呢啲咧都係我哋經歷神嘅時候。
but it's exactly in these times that we experience God.
相信神一定會供應，神一定會看顧。
And I believe that God will provide and He will take care of us.
最後仲同大家分享下我哋生活中嘅轉變啦。
And then now I would like to share with you how we experience God through the change in our lives.
係啦，咁因為細女嘅學習問題同埋香港嘅環境因素啦，
Because of my younger daughter's learning difficulty and also the issues in Hong Kong,
咁我同 Enoch 咧就決定要離開香港啦。
Enoch and myself decided to leave Hong Kong.
咁對於從來冇諗過移民、英文又唔好嘅我，
So to me, someone who had never considered immigration overseas and also whose English isn't particularly good,
咁第一時間咧就梗係諗到投靠親人啦。
so the very first thought was to go somewhere with my family members.
咁我細妹咧就係住喺加拿大溫哥華嘅，
My younger sister actually lives in Vancouver in Canada,
咁係一個華人嘅城市啦。
and it's a city full of Chinese people,
咁教育又相對輕鬆啲啦。
and education is quite easy there, I guess.
又
Not
有
as stressful,
又有親人嘅照應啦。
and I would have families who could help me out.
咁爸爸媽媽都話一齊同我哋去加拿大一家團聚喎。
And even my parents said they would later move over there to Canada as well, so that our whole family may be reunited.
咁所以理所當然咁咧，就一啲都冇思考過，我就決定咗去加拿大啦。
So without any further consideration, I almost took it for granted that I should be going to Canada.
係啦，咁我嘅考慮因素裏面咧係冇教會呢一項嘅。
And the church never came across my mind as I was considering this matter of moving overseas.
咁我一心諗住去加拿大咧，係要同妹妹一齊住溫哥華添。
And my whole goal was to move to Vancouver to live with my sister.
咁我明知多倫多係有教會嘅，但係都冇諗過去。
And even though I knew we have our church in Toronto, but I never thought of going to Toronto.
咁我就係俾自己一個藉口，就話我去到溫哥華再揾新嘅教會啦。
So I gave myself an excuse. I could always find another church in Vancouver.
咁我同自己講話，我會繼續返教會嘅，亦都冇阻我相信神嘅。
And I told myself, I will continue to attend church. This is not going to stop me from continuing to follow God.
而計劃去溫哥華呢件事咧，亦都係我哋決定咗之後先至同教會牧師講嘅。
And this whole plan to move to Vancouver was something that we only inform our pastors afterwards.
咁當然牧師都有建議我哋不如去多倫多啦。
Of course, when the pastors finally heard of our plan, they did suggest, well, why don't you consider going to Toronto instead?
咁但係我完全唔想商量，亦都唔想面對。
But to me, it was totally out of the question. I didn't want to even consider.
係啦，其實有一
And I
段
didn't want to face up to it.
係啦，其實有一段長嘅時間咧，都係唔想去禱告求問神嘅。
And for a long time, I didn't even want to pray to inquire of God.
咁係因住兩個女嘅問題啦，或者係香港嘅環境問題啦。
I guess my mind was just full of the problems of my 2 daughters and also what was going on in Hong Kong.
咁所以好似求問都得唔到回應。
And it felt as if that I didn't get answers from God anyway when I prayed.
咁所以就將自己同神嘅關係擺埋咗一邊。
So I just put aside my relationship with God.
咁就係顧住自己去籌算生活，計劃去加拿大啦。
And I was just very focused on planning my own life and how we could move to Canada.
咁嗰個時候咧，加拿大就推出咗一啲移民計劃俾香港人嘅。
And at that time, Canada had these special policies for people seeking to immigrate to Canada.
咁只要5年內有大學嘅學歷咧，就可以申請去工作簽證。
So they could get a work visa as long as they had some kind of qualification in the past 5 years.
咁於是 Enoch 咧就報讀咗一啲海外大學嘅課程讀啦。
So Enoch enrolled in some overseas long-distance education program.
咁就用1年嘅時間去讀書，攞到個學歷就預備去加拿大啦。
So he got his qualification in a year, and we were prepared to move to Canada.
咁而家我哋出現喺度，就知道我哋係失敗咗啦。
But the fact that we are here today proves that our plan was a total failure.
咁舊年嘅呢個時候咧，其實 Enoch 畢業啦。
So last year, around this time, Enoch graduated.
咁我哋就申請去加拿大。
And we then made our application to move to Canada.
當時我哋已經辭晒職，一切準備出發㗎。
And we had already resigned from our jobs, and we were prepared to go anytime.
但係正係嗰個時候咧，就竟然傳出加拿大政府咧改變咗啲政策喎。
But just around that time, news came that Canada had changed their policy.
突然咧對海外大學嘅課程咧審批好嚴謹。
They suddenly tightened the assessment of all these qualifications from various universities.
即係可能係網上課程，佢唔信你係真讀書。
Especially with the online courses, they didn't really think they qualify.
咁所以Enoch 讀嗰間學校咧，有好多同學都冇獲得工作簽證。
So actually, not only Enoch, but many of his friends enrolled in the same course didn't end up getting a work visa.
就係咁樣，我哋準備咗1年嘅計劃就落空啦。
And because of that, our plan, this plan that we had for 1 year came to an end.
咁嗰刻係腦海一片空白，唔知點解神要咁樣對我哋。
And at that time, both of us, our minds were blank, and we were at a loss, like why God had to treat us like this.
係喺箴言16章9節度講到。
In Proverbs chapter 16, verse 9, it says,
人心籌算自己的道路，惟雅慧指引他的腳步。
The heart of man plans his way, but Yahweh establishes his steps.
雖然咧覺得好失望，
Even though we were extremely disappointed,
但係喺呢件事上面咧，我哋都經歷到夫妻同心嘅重要。
but we experienced the importance of being of one heart through this incident.
咁我哋都冇埋怨神，但係其實係唔敢埋怨神。
So we did not grumble against God, or I should say more accurately, we dare not grumble against him.
我哋深知道咧自己嘅任意妄為同埋唔理神咧係神唔喜悅嘅。
Because we know deeply that it was our own willfulness and our deliberately ignoring God, and these are all not pleasing to God at all.
咁我同 Enoch 都認為呢一個好明顯係神唔開條路俾我哋啦。
So both Enoch and I could discern that obviously God was not opening the way for us to Canada.
咁即使我哋唔明白神嘅心意，我哋睇落覺得個計劃好好啊。
Even though at the time we did not understand God's will, to us it seems like our plan was really good.
咁但係神唔開路，我哋就尋求神，求神開另一條路啦。
But since God did not open the way, we then seek God further and to ask him to please open another way for us.
咁我哋好快就調整好心情啦。
So quite quickly we adjusted and we were adjusted our emotions and everything.
咁諗到既然都行到呢一步，一定要離開香港嘅，咁我哋就換個地點啦。
And since we were already up to a point where everything was kind of ready to go, we just thought, how about we change the destination then?
於是我哋就決定改到嚟英國啦。
And that's why we decided to move to England instead.
咁呢個係除咗加拿大以外另一個可行嘅地方。
Because the UK is the only other possible place that we could move to other than Canada.
其他嘅國家咧，我哋冇辦法申請或者要太多嘅資金啦。
Because for the other countries, we either do not qualify, we could not apply to go, or we don't have sufficient funds.
咁喺咁樣之前呢，我係完全唔認識英國嘅。
But prior to this, I had no idea about
如
the UK. Like, I really didn't know this country well.
完全冇嚟過英國啦。
I had not been here before.
咁我對英國嘅認識呢，大概只有倫敦橋同埋曼聯球隊。
So maybe all I knew about the UK was the London Bridge or the Manchester United.
咁我哋喺12月30號就決定，
So on the 31st of December, we made a decision.
然後3月16號2個半月嘅時間，我哋一家4口就嚟咗呢個從未嚟過嘅英國啦。
And then in 2.5 months, on the 16th of March, on the 16th of March, so within 2.5 months, the four of us stepped foot in the UK, a place where we had never been before.
雅各書4章6節度講過，
In James chapter 4, verse 6, it says,
但他賜更多的恩典，所以經常說神阻擋驕傲的人，賜恩給謙卑的人。
But he gives more grace. Therefore it says, God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble.
咁我哋吸取教訓，真係知道唯有神可以幫助我哋。
So we learnt our lesson, and we know that only God can help us.
所以我哋謙卑落嚟，放低所有自己嘅籌算，
We finally humbled ourselves, and we let go of all our own plans.
安排嚟英國嘅每一件事，我哋都一家4口一齊禱告交託神。
So with every little thing that has to do with our move to the UK, the four of us together committed these matters to God.
咁呢2個半月，我哋究竟經歷咗啲咩呢？
So what had we experienced in these 2.5 months?
我哋檢查身體、申請簽證啦，
We had to go through our body check to apply for visas,
船運啲家當啦，辭去咗我 part time 嘅工作啦，
get our shipments of our stuff, and to resign from our part-time job.
小朋友退學啦，然後就租英國嘅屋。
The children had to inform the school they were leaving, and also to start finding a place to rent here in the UK,
咁仲有申請英國嘅學校啦，
and to apply for schools here in the UK.
咁仲用積分換咗4張免費機票嚟英國添。
And we also managed to use our points, those frequent flyer points, to get 4 free tickets.
係啦，
to
未
the UK.
係從來未試過咁短時間可以換到免費機票嘅。
Never have we been able to get free tickets with our points in such a short time.
仲要
before.
4張，
And it's 4, not just 1.
咁每件事咧都係超級順利嘅，
So everything was super smooth.
可以形容係暢通無阻，
You could even say it's like, there was no resistance
就
whatsoever.
好似開快車咁樣。
It's almost like you're cruising along.
咁同我之前我哋用咗1年幾計劃去加拿大嘅情況係好大嘅反差。
It was such a huge contrast from the previous year where we spent over a year to plan how we could move to Canada.
咁呢2個半月嘅經歷咧，令我哋讚歎神嘅工作原來係咁奇妙嘅。
So our experience in these 2.5 months really made us marvel at God's work, how wondrous it
原來
was.
咧神嘅開路咧係可以完全毫無攔阻嘅。
We realized when God opens up a way, you could really go without any obstacles.
係咯，感謝神咧，俾我哋就咁樣順利咁樣嚟到英國，就開始咗新生活啦。
So we praise God for leading us and opening up the way for us to start our life here in the UK.
咁而家我哋咧已經到步8個半月啦。
And it's been 8.5 months since we came.
咁呢段日子裏面咧，無論係小朋友讀書啦，
So in this past while, whether it's our 2 daughters' education,
in-law 嘅工作啦，同埋我哋一家人嘅適應啦，
in-laws job, or just our family getting used to the life here,
咁全部都睇到神嘅看顧。
we really see how God has been taking care of everything.
咁最重要嘅咧就係我哋一家仍然可以繼續返教會。
And the most important thing of all is that our whole family can attend church.
咁我哋嚟到呢個利物浦教會咧，好快就同弟兄姊妹熟絡啦。
And we became very close to the Liverpool church family.
咁我哋可以互相分享代禱，彼此鼓勵扶持。
We can pray for each other, share from our hearts to support one another,
咁仲可以一齊服侍神添。
and to serve God together.
咁我相信呢，呢個係冇可能我喺溫哥華隨便揾一間新教會去翻譯做到嘅。
And I know that, honestly speaking, this is something impossible if I had chosen to go to Vancouver and just settled for any church.
咁如果喺溫哥華咧，最差嘅情況咧，可能係我投入唔到新嘅教會生活，甚至離開神添。
And actually, in the worst scenario, if I had gone to Vancouver, there's a high likelihood that I couldn't really fit in to the new church, and I might end up just stop going to church completely.
咁樣我咧真係明白到神嘅安排係有佢嘅美意嘅。
So now, as I look back, I understand, God's ways are really out of His good intentions for us.
咁咧喺箴言嘅3章5至6節度講到，
In Proverbs chapter 3, verses 5 to 6.
你要專心仰賴雅偉，不可依靠自己的聰明，在你一切所行的事上都要認定他，他必指引你的路。
Trust in Yahweh with all your heart, and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him, and He will make straight your paths.
係咯，喺信主嘅呢啲年裏面咧，其實我嘅爸爸媽媽咧見到我經歷嘅一切咧，都會擔心嘅。
And in all these years since I follow God, actually my parents, they were still quite anxious for me sometimes.
無論係揾工啦、照顧2個女啦，甚至係移民啦。
Whether it was to do with my job seeking, or when we were immigrating, or just concerning my 2 daughters.
咁但係佢哋都見住我咧係全部都安然度過嘅。
But they witnessed how I managed to pass all these things very smoothly.
所以我爸爸媽媽咧成日都話我，你冇事嘅，你傻人有傻福啊嘛。
So my parents used to just say, "Oh yeah, you'll be fine," because you're simple, and simple people have these extra blessings somehow.
咁因為咧我比我哥哥同埋妹妹咧都係單純又唔聰明嘅。
Because compared to my elder brother and my younger sister, I'm actually more simple-hearted, more pure, and maybe not as smart.
但係爸爸媽媽睇嚟咧就係我傻得嚟都係條路好順嘅。
So from my parents' point of view was that, even though you're not the smartest one, but at least your path is quite smooth.
咁直到而家咧，佢哋除咗會講傻人有傻福之外咧，仲更加會講咧，你個主會保佑你噶嘛。
But now, besides just kind of giving the credit to the fact that I was, lucky because I was not as smart, and they would add another line saying, "Well, your God would watch over you, right?"
係啦，佢哋都知道其實冇人咧係一世都好運嘅。
Because actually they also know there's no one who would be lucky all their life.
但係我呢個傻福咧就係主保守俾我嘅生命好有福。
So this seemingly blessing that comes from my simplicity actually is God's own blessing to me.
咁最後同大家分享一節經文啦。
So I want to share with you one final verse.
喺馬可福音10章27節。
In the Gospel of Mark, chapter 10, verse 27.
在人是不能的，在神卻不然，因為在神凡事都能。
With man it is impossible, but not with God, for all things are possible with God.
咁喺信主咁多年裏面呢，呢節經文咧都係俾我好大嘅鼓勵。
And this particular verse gives me great encouragement in all the years that I've come to know the Lord.
無論係升學啦、工作啦、家庭各方面，都有好多困難或者要抉擇嘅地方。
Whether it was to do with my education or my work or my family, there were many difficulties and many important decisions that I had to make.
但係神一定同我哋同行嘅。
But God has promised to walk with us.
咁的確有好多不可能嘅事發生喺我身上啦。
And indeed, many things that seemed impossible actually became possible in my life.
咁呢啲都係神嘅恩典。
These are all God's grace towards me.
希望我嘅分享咧，同時都鼓勵到大家啦。在信嘅人凡事都能。
So I hope that my sharing will encourage each of you. With those, all things are possible for those who believe.
咁我今日見證分享到呢度。
Yep. So this is my testimony sharing. How about we close in prayer? So let us pray.